We're starting in 5, 4, 3, 2. Let's go. Let's make this happen. Let's make this magical.
Do you remember exactly where we were when we left off?
Chris was maybe almost in the process of answering
the first question.
The first question that, really, and what Al had said.
Let me say this, that Chris is definitely self-aware of his ability to speak on a topic. I don't want to say ad nauseum, but for a lengthy amount of time. Yeah. And we'd actually, Al and I went back and forth on this, and I talked to Chris about it too. And we found Chris very interesting. So, but Chris had warned me from the beginning that his answers need to be cut off for the most part. And I didn't know how true that was until we got into it. But like Al and I both said, they were interesting and we were learning. And that's a lot of what we want to do here. So, and especially with these initial meetings of people where we, you guys hear that?
Yeah, someone taking a shower.
We're
who is that?
It's on my end.
Of course it is.
Are you rolling off the keyboard?
Sorry.
What?
No,
rabbit ears.
Truthfully, it's dinner that my wife is wonderfully making.
Is it
right
fajitas?
Now. But it's picking up. It's grilled chicken. That's what it is.
Well, I don't think the grill is being used, or maybe it was on fire.
No, it's maybe 50 feet away. So
you sure she didn't order out from Sizzler?
I promise.
I don't think I've ever eaten at Sizzler. Is that strange?
I haven't either. I've driven past it all the time.
I've had friends that have grabbed the microphone. They used to call that back. We're going to need a ribeye, heavy on the eye, light on the rib. I remember being at one in Wisconsin, and my friend, we call him the Blasker, and he would grab the microphone from the people and just go, Sizzler.
Now, see, it's going to have to become a tradition now, at least once.
So we have on the show Al Jackson, who is part of the title with me, Frank Caliendo, Dave Houston, who I grew up with, Chris Spangle, and Brian Love. And last time we did not have Dave with us, so he's going to add a little bit to the mix. He's got some questions. Dave, you had said something off screen to Chris about history majors, minors, and
sure.
Go ahead.
Sure. Well, no, I have a background in political science and history. That's what I got my degree in. I went to the, some people call it the People's Republic of Madison. So no, I was sad that I couldn't make the last podcast that you had with Chris, and I'm glad that I could be here to sort of add to the conversation and ask a couple questions.
Cool. So where do we want to begin? Anybody have a thought there? Chris, I'm sure you
I'm trying to have less thoughts. That's
no. It's all
in 2019. New year, new me. Well, we could go back to the question that Al, the cliffhanger at the end of the last episode was, how do you reconcile? I think, Al, it was something along the lines of like you're for the free market, but at the same time you're kind of anti-media and how they approach certain things, and how does that jive? I don't remember the exact specific.
That was it. It seemed like I felt like the media was getting kind of not a raw deal, but a different deal than everybody else. It seems like you were very open to people being able to buy buy products and sell products to whom they want to, which I also have a little issue with that. But also that you were then saying that the media is sensationalizing things using clickbait, which clickbait is how they make money from advertising, because people don't use newspapers anymore. So it seems like the news media was being held to a different standard in terms of a business that is trying to generate a profit.
Yeah, and it probably is a double standard, but I also have worked in the media my entire career. And you guys know that when you're behind a microphone, you do carry some extra level of responsibility. And I think a lot of times the media doesn't necessarily use that responsibly. So there's a couple different pieces there. The first is responsibility. Controlling a large audience online in a couple different places. So I got a photo today. You may have seen the Catholic high school kids. There was a photo that one of my contributors sent to me this morning that he had personally found that was these kids, the spirit group, dressed up basically in not just blackface, but black body. And I was just like, this is not going to help the conversation. Maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not. But at the end of the day, we would have been the very first people to publish this. And I just felt that was not something that would be necessary, to publish on We Are Libertarians. It would get a lot of traction. Maybe I'd get a lot of attention out of it. But at the end of the day, would that really help contribute to the conversation that's happening? That's a very real instance where I feel a responsibility to say, this may be relevant for this time period, but is it important? It may be to some people.
You don't think that photo would add context to the conversation that we're having?
Not really.
About
and I'll
those
tell you
kids?
what, I think that you don't know if those are the same individuals that you saw at the Capitol, right? Or at the Lincoln Memorial. If the same kids that were in that crowd were the ones dressed up in blackface, then yeah, that's relevant. But I don't personally have the resources to investigate that. Now, the Daily Mail put that out. I don't know that the Daily Mail necessarily investigated that. They just said, here's the high school doing something outrageous, and didn't really do further investigation. It was, I got caught up this weekend in the outrage of it. It was such a, the first impression of it was such a violation of appropriate norms that I was absolutely disgusted by it. And then, the next day you're sitting here going, man, I was completely inappropriate. Like, even if the original context was exactly what it was, is the appropriate punishment for these kids' photos to live on Google forever, to have Hollywood celebrities doxing them and encouraging essentially harassment and bullying. It's like, where's the line? Like, I got too caught up in it, and I was irresponsible with my voice. And so I think that the media sometimes lets down their responsibility. As for the business model, that's probably a longer conversation. But
so, Chris, do you think that, I'm sorry for stepping on your last sentence, but do you think that so are you in effect kind of saying that the Daily Mail wasn't fully responsible in how they portrayed pictures that possibly weren't related, but tried to make them seem related in order to gain viewership or subscriptions?
I think the Daily Mail did what the Daily Mail does, which is take a piece of outrageous information, put it online, get a bunch of clicks for their advertisers. It's the same thing that we bash the Russians for. Well, the Russians came in here and posted these clickbait mills to try and get people to click on it and get outraged so they can get advertising money based on Google ads or whatever. It's like Americans.
Who you're dealing with is what you're saying. Right.
And so how do you prevent that? You don't.
Let me ask you this. Is there a responsibility? Because I have times where I get flustered by watching, and I'm using a broad term, a blanket term, the media in general. And I think some people do a very good job and some people don't, of getting that research. And it seems like there's so much timeliness and ratings, and I understand that. But should it be something we all know and realize that the media is profit driven, and then understand that from the beginning? And I don't know how you get people to learn that, because when I was growing up, we all just believed the news was right all the time, that they were just telling you the truth. And as news evolved and 24-hour news cycles and 24-hour news channels came about, it became even more of trying to get you to stay and pay attention to it. But like to Al's point, is that, do we as citizens need to be responsible and understand that's the country we live in and you're allowed to do that? Does that make sense? Because I found myself with having that animosity the same as you at times, or it seems that you have. I don't want to put feelings behind you, because I get that way. I see things and I go, they're just trying to rile somebody up. What's happening here? And it works. And sometimes it works on me.
Can I answer that?
Right.
Or at least what I think about that, because I've thought a lot about that. I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm going to just throw this out to you guys. I think about what you're saying, Frank, the same way that like people from my generation go, you know what? MTV doesn't show music videos anymore. It's not even music television. They don't show video. Do you know why they don't show videos? It's because when they do, people turn the freaking channel. Right. And I think what happened, you're talking about growing up in an earlier time, Frank. I'm making it sound like you're from 1905.
Well, I appreciate it, young man.
Hear ye.
Give me a second while I put my teeth in.
But I think that the news was like that, and people came home and they got a very plain white bread, vanilla toast description of the news, and that was the news as you knew it. We then saw cable news come in. They had a lot of time to fill, so then you started getting people that needed to editorialize because there wasn't enough content. And what these places found out was that a person foaming at the mouth, yelling about the Democrats or Republicans, or somebody even that guy that was yelling about the tax stuff, not taxes but the stocks. The guy that's like got his jacket off and he's screaming,
Rick
sell, and it's because. Yes, that's what people pay attention to. So, like, I feel like we talk about the media like it's some giant in the hillside coming to visit the townspeople. The media is us, and it reacts to what we tell it to do.
And it always
if we wanted
has.
plain Jane media, if we wanted plain Jane media, the ratings will reflect that, and Fox and CNN and everybody will come right back to the center and do whatever we look at. They will put on. Period.
Right.
What were you starting to say, Dave?
I was just going to say that business model has been around forever, right? It always has been about division. There's more money to be made in division. And if you go back to William Randolph Hearst, or you go back to yellow journalism, or, the papers have always been like that. The news and the media have always been like that. That's the model they follow. It's what we're seeing now is really nothing new. It's just, I think,
expanded by technology.
It's expanded by technology, and it's maybe perhaps emphasized because we have the ability now to act as that bullhorn. Right, so it gets magnified, but the basic model has always been the same about dividing people and sensationalizing and getting more eyes to charge more money for advertising. It's
the reason there are headlines, right?
Right.
I mean, there's the headlines. Snazzy headlines are what draws you in, even though you read halfway through and you're like, this isn't exactly what the headline said. Right. But it sells the papers first. And the headline writer, a lot of people don't know this. People who write headlines don't necessarily, and I don't think a lot of the time, write the articles. There's a person who writes a headline and the editor deals with it, and they put the headline on like cutting and pasting. And I think a lot of times true journalists get upset about the headlines that are on their articles, because that's a different thing. That's a lot of times headlines are about selling the newspaper. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I that's the way it was when I was in school, going to school for mass communication journalism. I was amazed by it, but I don't think everybody knows that stuff. And that's why, again, I keep pointing this out. That's why I like doing this type of show and talking about this stuff, because I don't think everybody thinks to look at that stuff. There are plenty of things in life I don't think to look up and see how it's actually put together. And we have little insights of our own, and learning from each other and learning about this stuff, we just get somewhere in that.
So I've been
play devil's. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just want to piggyback on what Frank said. So I've been talking to some local journalists, and in talking to a local news editor here in town for a local TV station.
And that's Indianapolis.
Indianapolis, yeah. The NBC affiliate here, and then also the one of the Star's columnists. They both said, we don't do news for television. We don't do news for the print newspaper anymore. We do news for online. That is where our business model is taking us. And the Star here in town is owned by Gannett, and they have a company that is going to take a look at taking the company over and buying it out, and it's a hedge fund. And the hedge fund is has built a ton of click mills. Now, this is Gannett newspaper. Most of your hometown newspapers have Gannett. And so this, the idea that a hedge fund that only cares about profit and squeezing out every little bit of revenue that they can from your hometown newspaper, the Indianapolis Star is the one that broke the Larry Nassar case open with the gymnastics scandal. Hometown journalism really does make a difference. And so you're talking about a company that is digital first, cut every single thing that you can, flip it to make more money. They're really a pirate organization. And I think what'll happen with a lot of these local media entities is that the people of Indianapolis, the city fathers, the big money here in town will take a look at this and go, it's untenable to completely gut where would you cut your hometown newspaper anymore? And they'll buy these news outlets and say, let's start looking at it from an NPR or a ProPublica model where we know you're going to lose money, just do good journalism. I hope we get to that point. But in the meantime, we're just dealing with people who are writing headlines to get clicks, to make their corporate entities happy so they can show an increase on the balance sheet. It's really kind of a perverse business model. And so you as a consumer can't do anything about it. You just have to be aware that media outlets think this way. And so you have to find a balanced media diet.
You actually, Chris, are speaking to the devil's advocate question that I was just about to ask in response to both Frank and to Dave regarding the business models. Although they're there to make money, that's their MO. Do you think that there are conglomerates or powers that be whose motive is strictly to push their agenda as opposed to do what the public is asking for? And you basically answered one side of that question by talking about a hedge fund running a media outlet. I guess I don't really know one way or the other. I was just wondering if in your experience, you think that that's happening more so like in the 40s or 50s or even back as far as William Randolph Hearst, when that was driven by the men who had power as opposed to what the public was asking to hear does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, from my standpoint, I think what you're getting at a little bit is, this concept of liberal media bias, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is that really what's taking place, or is it strictly profit motive? Right.
Correct.
And if the two are in conflict, which one wins, sort of thing.
Right.
From my side, and I'm going to get this number wrong, but I want to say that 90% of the media out there is controlled by, I think, 4 or 5 major conglomerates. So yes, it's all controlled by a certain small group of people. But in terms of like a liberal bias, I don't particularly believe there's a liberal bias. I think some of the commentators have their own opinions that skew that way. But I think this is about shareholder value. This is about generating profit. Right. They'll report on any story from any side that they think will drive the bottom line. So from that standpoint, I think that the profit motive outweighs the sort of bias. And I think what you're getting now is, in order to differentiate themselves within the marketplace, they have to decide, okay, if you're outlet A versus outlet B, how are you going to separate yourself from the masses, right? And I think what you're seeing is Fox has chosen to go farther right and to sort of say, okay, we're going to occupy this space in the market, right? And we're gonna nail down this space. And CNN has always been sort of in the middle, but now they're starting to tilt a little bit more left. MSNBC way over on the left. So everybody's sort of staked out their claim to a certain segment, right? And in doing that, what they're actually doing is they're ginning up more business, right? So rather than everybody being sort of moderate and in the middle and bland, they're becoming more and more a separate brand that represents something different to the people, right?
So, well, in all intents and purposes, you're saying their target market.
Exactly, their target market. And then it's almost like it's like Tupac and Biggie, right? Is it a real fight, or is it we're fighting to sell more papers, right? or we're fighting to sell more albums.
That was a real fight, by the way. They're both.
That was
Yes, yes.
But
Hopefully
no,
it
but
doesn't
I understand what you're
media,
saying, Dave. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I don't know. I'd like to see Rachel Maddow take on Bill O'Reilly in the ring.
Oh, any day.
That brings it back to MTV Celebrity Deathmatch.
Oh wow, yeah, I remember that.
Let me add a little historical perspective, because I've studied a lot about this, trying to answer this question. And I found, like, if you go to Rushville, Indiana, there's the Rushville Republican, or Corden, Indiana, the Corden Democrat. Mm-hmm. The idea that we have always had this media that was just overarching and fair and balanced, like that really only kind of existed in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Before that, in the era of Randolph Hearst, if you go a little bit back into the Civil War era, the pre-Civil War era, it was all partisan media. Here in America, it all started at the founding. If you go back to the Alien and Sedition Acts, there's a great book that I just read called Liberty's First Crisis by Charles Slack about the Alien and Sedition Acts.
I just finished that too.
Did you really?
No, I'm not. I just finished Clifford the Big Red Dog. That's about my level.
But when you read this book, you realize the very first Congress is just arguing over whether or not they should let immigrants into the country, and then they're trying to crack down on media. Benjamin Franklin Bache, who ran the Aurora, which Ben Franklin's grandson,
right,
was totally against John Adams, and they passed these laws to shut the guy up. So I think we make the mistake sometime when we look at our present time going, wow, things are getting so much worse, instead of going, we're just kind of repeating the same things. History just has this rhyme to it, and we're just kind of discovering what our grandfathers discovered and their grandfather. Like, it's, I think partisan media has just always been a part of America, and it will always be a part of America. And it's kind of a fool's errand to say, I'm a libertarian, so therefore National Review and the Nation shouldn't exist.
That's actually a good point.
Well, let me broaden this out too. Is it more that we see and hear everything now? We didn't used to have everything. Like, I keep seeing these stories about terrible things happening to people, the kidnappings, all these crazy types of serial killers that have been. Could this stuff? Is it that people are getting wackier and weirder, or are we just able to hear about it more now? And I used to think it's people are just more. Yeah, I used to think it was people are just getting worse and worse and crazier, but now we just know.
Both. Yeah, right. I feel like it's a little bit of both.
There probably is some, but the ability to see it all going on is crazy. Even you couldn't have fathomed that 10, 15 years ago.
Frank, there's a book.
I mean,
go ahead.
Somebody talk, or I will.
Oh, I was waiting for Al to go. Actually,
no, I mean, it's just like I always say this. And matter of fact, I was saying this today on my talk show. I think that there is this to look back on the days of yesteryear with this wonderment, like, oh, those are the good old days, and man, how did things get so crazy? It's not that it's more crazy. It's just that you're aware of it now. You look at something like child molesters. When you talk to somebody that grew up in the 70s, these kids, they just stay inside all day, and their parents are helicopter parents. My parents would let us ride around, and we'd be out from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock. Do me a favor and put your zip code into a child molester's website and see how many sex offenders are around your neighborhood. Those guys that didn't just come around when the internet came out. Those guys have been around forever. That kind of mental delusion isn't new to us, and it's selfish for us to think that we were the first generation to bring that in. That's been around since the beginning of time. Pedophilia, preying on children. And what happened was a lot of those kids got molested for years and nothing was done about it. And so, like, when we say, wow, those are the good old days, the 70s, the 80s, people were strung out on crack, on cocaine. They used crack to put a generation of black men behind bars. You look at the 60s. I mean, we had wars going on. We had our country where in 1968 we lost RFK and Martin Luther King. Happy birthday, Mr. King. So Dr.
Absolutely.
King. So it's just like when was it so good? We just know more. We just know, you know, now that your neighbor's a jerk and letting their dog poop on your lawn because you have the Ring thing on your door, which is a camera. So now you can look at work and see, oh, he's letting his dog pee on. You just know, as opposed to 20 years ago, you'd be like, hey, how you doing, Mr. Caliendo? What a great neighbor. He's not. Now you just know him. So it's more about like, do you want to know or do you want to be in the dark?
To piggyback on that is you look at the Larry Nassar case in the U.S. gymnastics, you're able to build like a coalition of people really quickly standing up. Like the R. Kelly thing is a great example. Without modern technology and social media and the ability to connect people really quickly, something like Surviving R. Kelly immediately brings about justice. Now there's a flip side with like these kids from this weekend where it's like, oh, we should have taken a minute. But the power structures are much more challenged in the modern age because we have the ability to communicate, and that's good a lot of times.
There's even one that is actually a very hot topic is the relationship between our police force and those in the brown community. Without that can be a complete podcast for another day, but the idea that there is such accessibility just through your cell phone does one of two things. It enlightens the community on what has been going on for hundreds of years. No, not hundreds, but tens of years with the police force and those in the brown community. But it also makes the police force's job tougher because they're not only held to an accountability and standard of what the oath that they take, but now they also have to be accountable to the standard of being judged through the media, or actually, being judged through the media without ever having to go through any type of due process. So,
and I think that's the difficult thing is a slice, and I don't want to take anything away because I agree with you wholeheartedly. In terms of is a friend of mine,
just my personal experience alone.
Right, a friend of mine, Chappelle Lacey, who lived here for a while, a black man who would get pulled over just for being black for no reason whatsoever. And if you met him, he loves punk rock. He's the most jovial, nicest guy in the world, stand-up comic, heart of gold, wonderful person. And this hadn't happened to him a bunch, and it happened to him fairly recently in the last year or two, and he didn't even know what was going on. He was just so thrown back by it. But where I was going with that was, so the video happens, and a piece of it gets out there, and then people run wild with it and don't know the whole thing. And I don't want to sound like it's that old, well, you got to see the whole thing all the time, because a lot of times the whole thing is just the same thing as that small little slice that you've seen. But people start to form opinions so quickly, and the news gets that stuff out there so quickly. And I apologize that I'm talking about something so important at this point as that.
No, I'm with you though.
Because it can happen with something that's not that important, which might not even happen as much because I do know how much this happens. And the media goes out and runs with it, but that's kind of their job to take that chance. But at the same time, there's that responsibility you're talking about. It's very, just in the world we live in, it's just so tough to figure out when you do this.
It illustrates the importance of journalism. I think this weekend really illustrated that with both the BuzzFeed thing and the Lincoln Memorial issue. Journalism is important because you hear journalists talking about working on a story, which means they hear an initial source, they go and talk to another source, they go to a counter source, they spend time kind of working through a bunch of different sources and documents and fact checking it. And then when they figure out what the truth is, then they publish that. That's how that's supposed to work. But I think a lot of people are frustrated because we see things in real time. You have journalists that you're supposed to trust immediately tweeting out things. A lot of people follow me and trust my word, and then I let them down this week because I was just so instantaneous with my outrage and took it too far. And it's let
me ask you this. Can I stop you right there? So what do? You've now are in the same spot of the people you're very critical of, right? Does it make you understand their side more?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think there is a lot of
what just came across your screen? What was that?
It was a lemur. That's what that looked like. What
just happened?
I like to move it. That's what that was. That came
You have one of those in your house?
I have two. I was completely unfazed. I didn't even realize.
Hold on. Wait a second. Is that the Libertarian lemur? Is that a mascot?
Look at me.
What? Really? What was that? That looked like
my
Daniel
cat.
Boone's hat.
He'll be back.
You're not.
Well, I think it gives you pause, and you kind of go, okay, like with the BuzzFeed thing. It's a lot of people talking about,
give the background on that so everybody knows what exactly you're talking, because not everybody.
So BuzzFeed basically said, we think that Donald Trump instructed Michael Cohen to lie.
And what did I say about that?
It's completely false. Rumor.
Fake news.
Fake news.
It's O'Doul's fake booze.
And they have a lot of egg on their face because it wasn't very well sourced. But at the same time, it's like, we got to get this out before anybody else does.
Right.
And so you have to look at everything through the lens of incentives. And so, your incentive in a lot of ways, like on Saturday, it was going to make me feel good by being on the right side and really getting this little smug with his little smirk. And it just like the incentive there for me was it feels good. And I was giving commentary and see, this is what Trump has done to our society. And I was thinking about myself first and foremost. Journalists, the incentive a lot of times is, well, to do your job, you have to do it this way or else you're going to get fired and replaced. And these corporations set up bad incentives. So you have to look at we're doing this on a day. Very few people are just altruistic. Nonviolence is a rare characteristic. We're celebrating a day for Martin Luther King because he was altruistic. He was nonviolent. We're holding up those values as a society saying we need to be more like that because so few people actually are, because the incentive is give in to the anger, give in to the hate, give in to just staying silent when something is wrong. It's a lot of different incentives. Like if you look at Martin Luther King's life, he didn't have a great life. He chose to stand up and say, this is wrong. New technologies helped. And I'll finish here within the next 2 minutes. So you had new technology where you had white America in the North going, listen, I may not be for Martin Luther King, but I'm watching on television these Southern cops sicking dogs on people, and I'm definitely not for that. And I think that technology has benefited us by showing us the good and bad in society. And with the situation like with cops, it's like, okay, I'm for the police, but I'm not for that. And that's the conversation that I think we're kind of having, but also in a weird, perverted way on social media. It's not working.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, well, again, it's like with the discussion with police. And I mean, again, this is a conversation for a number of podcasts that could just be its own entity. But I mean, as it pertains to kind of the point I've been making with the media and everything else, again, we cannot look at the police like they are just this sentient being. They just act on their own accord with their own laws. The police do what their community wants them to do, whether it's unspoken or not. The sheriff that you hire, if he runs on a, hey, we take a no nonsense approach to, I'm the law and order guy. That's code for I'm going to bust some heads about people that don't look like and don't live in your neighborhood. There's a reason that certain neighborhoods, as a black or brown person or as a multiracial couple in certain areas, that the police couldn't be more bored with. You could even sit out and be unbothered. But there are places where if Brian and I in a regular sedan, a Hyundai, go driving up in some neighborhoods, we're going to be magically pulled over. And it's not a theory at this point. It's not like, well, we'll have a debate about this point. It's that it will happen because it's always happened. And the reason that it happens is because the police know that that's what the people in that neighborhood want. They're like, that person does not look like somebody that lives in this neighborhood. Pull them over. You're not seeing.
It's because we were in the Hyundai. That's what.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Black men in a Korean car. Come on. Yeah. So it does have a lot to do with that, though. You don't see a lot of 16-year-old white volleyball players pull over. That it's not a thing. But there's a reason that you kind of see the same thing. So when we talk about the police, we have to be intellectually honest when we say that they are representing the needs of their consumers, and their consumers, the people that do pay their bills, are the taxpayers of whatever county that they're in.
Well said.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. I used to live in Wauwatosa on 62nd Street, and 60th was the
Stop
dividing line
bragging.
between. but listen, wait till you hear that. So, but 60th was the dividing line between Milwaukee and Wauwatosa, right? And literally, you cross the street, property values go down $50,000, and you have a situation where there's a term for it that everybody would use. It was DWB. Any driving while black, right? Any African American, especially African American male youth driving across 60th into 61st, 62nd, what have you, would invariably be stopped. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it is as long as everybody was kept to the left of 60th, it was fine. Once they crossed 60th, well, then now we have to pull them over.
And what's interesting to me in reference to Al talking about the media and how it pertains to the media is now it was something that the community noticed, but now it's something that half of Facebook or Instagram will notice because someone else in the community will show it happening on their phone. So then it immediately becomes a trial via social media, and everyone who feels as though they have a platform based on Instagram or so many Snapchat, whatever the medium is. So it just I think, just to what Chris said about how it in the grand scheme of things isn't working, but what it is doing is it's sparking more conversation than it did in the past.
Well, I think if you watch the Philando Castile video, it's pretty hard not to think this is just an execution,
right?
But it goes back to incentives. I think we go, the cops are racist. It's the cops' fault, and it's like that cop in the Philando Castile video. There's also it triggers in me some empathy because you hear the guy freaking out, and you go, okay, what are the incentives, or what training did he have, or what? How did this happen? I think that's kind of sometimes where we miss the conversation when we focus on the outrage, because we want justice for Philando Castile, but justice also demands that the person that shot Philando Castile have a fair trial, and we understand exactly what happened in that case, and and it goes back to the local sheriff that you elect. It goes back to the mayor that appointed the police chief. We have to focus on how these things happened and do it meticulously, instead of just going, I'm so angry, all I want is this person to be executed.
But the Castile example is a tough one for me because of how it happened. But I absolutely hear what you're saying.
Well, Chris, but I would just say this to your point. I think that, and also Brian, what you said when you're talking about being judged on social media and judged in a court of law. On social media, these cops are tried and convicted immediately. But in a court of law, I believe of all the murders that we've seen of black men and women, I believe 2 have been convicted.
Correct.
2 out of 30 or 40, including Trayvon Martin. Let's not forget George Zimmerman is walking around right now like us. I mean,
he's down here in Florida.
He murdered a boy and beat up his girlfriend. And he's not even white. Yeah, that's how valueless brown and black lives are. This guy just followed a kid, killed him, and got off, and then went and got a girlfriend and beat her up. And he's just and now I think he's selling the gun he killed Trayvon. I mean, he's a rotten human being. But it does. I mean, when you think about the optics of that gentleman and what that says without saying anything. When you look and all these officers are getting off from, the guy that choked Eric Garner in the front of that convenience store. Eric Garner was selling Lucy's. Lucy's are was he CDs or the guy that was selling cigarettes? Lucy's
he was cigarettes. Yeah. It's in New York, right? Yeah.
25 cigarettes. And it's just like that just shows you how valueless that our lives are met with. So there's a reason that black men tense up around police, because we just know that if anything goes down, I'll be dead, and there'll be a couple I'm sorry's, and he'll be put on death duty. But for me, I mean, I think that's why I never get pulled over. I always do the speed limit. I always try it because I have been assaulted by the police, and you know, I can't put myself in that position. I would rather get pulled over by a gang member than a police officer.
Well, I want to, you know, you look at the Lachlan McDonald police officer that just, you know, when I saw that he was guilty, I was like, oh, finally we're going to do this the right way. And then he gets, you know, a very light sentence. You look at the cop in Houston, I believe, that, you know, got drunk and walked into the wrong apartment and shot somebody.
That was not the wrong apartment. She knew where she was going.
Right. You look at it and you go, okay, every single chain of custody here was not followed. And if the black male had done the same thing, you better believe that the chain of custody for the person that shot someone would be followed. There is an imbalance. There is an injustice here, and it does need to be corrected. And it just, that's why it's a power structure thing. The power structure will always protect its own. Exactly. And that's where social media can be effective, you know. And I think that's where I consider myself a right-leaning person. And I look at it as the system of power is corrupt, and you look at it like, listen, I'm a black man, and it's a racially motivated imbalance. At the end of the day, the problem needs to be solved, and that's where we can come together and say, here, we may look at this, we may look at the elephant, and you have the trunk, and I have the leg, but at the end of the day, we're both looking at the same problem. Let's work together to fix it.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good. Well said, Chris.
Why don't we get back? I think we got very specific there, which was great. Back to a little bit more about some of the libertarian ideals, because that's the general stuff we were talking about last time. And one of the conversations I had with you, Chris, when we were back, when I was in Indiana talking to you, and it surprised me because you were so hardcore libertarian, but you personally, I feel, acquiesce quite a bit and believe, well, this might be in theory great, but in practicality, it doesn't work. And you were talking about schools and even unions, and how in certain unions you were for a private union, not public. But it surprised me because I wasn't in any understanding of that you would move that way at all. Sometimes when you think of somebody and they label themselves something so strong, that's why I stay away from any kind of label for myself, is because I worry about the same kind of judgment I'd put on somebody like I was putting on you, even though if it wasn't, I don't mean like in a negative way, just like assuming you were going to say one thing and then you said the opposite. And I was like, wait, what? That can't be. You're not just worried about only principles. You're worried about things actually getting done. And that was great. And I was like, I want to hear more. That's one of the things that made me want to talk to you, was you seem to make decisions based on that practicality. And I don't know if everybody does that, but it was great to hear that you did that, and really, it threw me for a loop. But at the same time, I was like, oh, that's awesome. I want to hear more.
I'm a man without country, that's for sure. A lot of libertarians, I don't call myself an anarchist. I think if I were to design my society, it would be fairly governmentless. Which we can talk about at a different time. But, these are my principles. These are my beliefs. And I work towards moving society in that direction. There are a lot of libertarians who are destination libertarians, where it's like, this is the destination. This is all I'm going to advocate for. Everything else is violence, and you're using the force of the state to punish people. And I have a more moderate personality. I grew up wanting to be a journalist, and, I wanted to be in the media. And I think when you have that kind of brain, you want to understand the world and then try to work within its limits. And I understand that there are people who just don't have that same kind of mentality. They say, this is the world that I want to advocate for, and I need to be principled, and I need to stay. And it's not that I'm not principled, but I also realize that I can't convince the four of you to change every belief system that you have or every mindset that you have. Like, you guys are in your 30s, 40s, 60s. You have, you have ingrained beliefs for your entire life. And my job as a communicator is to meet you where you're at and try to convince you that my way of thinking is the right way, but I have to be really patient with that. And I also think that there has to be some compromises on some things. I think on things like cultural issues, I don't believe in using the government to force anybody to do anything that I believe. That to me is an uncompromising position. I think that part of the reason that we have an issue with black men and police is because of government force. So like, let's start with the root issue of it. But, you know, when you're talking to people, I like to, I try not to be arrogant and think that I just have all this wisdom at 35 and that I know everything. I come off like a smug know-it-all, but I really do try to understand other people. I have a lot of conversations on a daily basis. And I just think listening and try to get different perspectives, like Al, you know Al, having grown up in a different place, in a different city, in in different socioeconomic structures, maybe. I don't know your background, but like it's Tom Griswold and Al are a great example. Like they get on the radio together and they're from very different classes. I can say that because Tom grew up fairly privileged, but they get along. And so how does that work? What's that dynamic? It starts with respect, starts with treating the other person like dignity. With dignity. It starts with understanding that you may be wrong and you have to accept when you're wrong and apologize for that. And, also, I just think respect is the fundamental value that we have to start with when it comes to these conversations, and laying down your pride a little bit and going, I have these beliefs. These are my beliefs. These are the really closely held beliefs. And then there are other beliefs that we can negotiate on some of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think it starts with first, the way that I got here was first understanding my personal beliefs, understanding my personal values, and I had to start there. And it's been a 15-year-long process to kind of work out what I believe and read a bunch and understand like how I feel about certain things and understand my bias towards things. And then once I did that, then I felt that I could really engage the world more. But I think you have to start with introspection first.
It sounds like a lot of work. I'm just going to read celebrity tweets and agree with them. That's so much easier.
Do what she says.
If Cardi B says it, I'm going with it.
Well, structures, cultural institutions like religion, political movements, libertarianism, conservative, these play important roles in society. It is a way for you to, it's brain software, right? So you go and you engage with the religion and their ideas. It's people who have worked on the same ideas for thousands of years. And you can catch up pretty quickly if you just read a few different books along these lines. But like read Howard Zinn at the same time that you're reading William Bennett and reading, Ron Paul. So cultural institutions are important because they help us kind of catch up, because it is a lot of work. But you have to realize your brain's not coming up with anything that 1,000 people before you haven't come up with. So go get on Google and search.
Ron Paul, I did the Tonight Show with Ron Paul. And it was it was Tonight Show or it was a talk show, and he was maybe the most non-political politician I've ever met, where he's just saying people are bad people and like on both quote unquote both sides that he wasn't on. I was like, you're what? Who talk more? And then they wanted me to say that I supported him on the Tonight Show, because I was like, that sounds great. They're like, we just got, and I don't know if this is true, but they said we just got Joe Rogan to say. I'm like, well, Joe Rogan, and this sounds almost funny for me to say, but it's Joe Rogan's way more educated on this than me. I'm not going to just jump out on national TV and say I'm for somebody, but what you're saying is very interesting. And I did start to learn a little bit more about him. He had, people would always say these things, that he had all these bills he had that put into, into Congress, and nothing had ever been passed. And then, but my understanding was after that, and from talking to some people, even trying to read a little bit, but that he didn't put a lot of pork in there. He wasn't trying to finesse anybody. And that's how a bill gets passed, right? You work a bunch of people over. Mm-hmm. He was just trying to get specific things done. And that's not what happens.
But Frank, did you like him because of the ideology or because of the fact that he was an outsider?
I think there was some of both. I think there was a little bit of everything. That some of the ideology, yes, but I just like that he was telling it like it is and being very honest, and stuff that I talked to other people that were running, and they were careful about every single word, to the point where, like, I don't believe you. I don't believe a word you're saying. And maybe he tricked me. Maybe he tricked me by talking like that and got me on his side that way, in terms of just liking him as an individual.
No.
But I remember hearing Jon Stewart say, but Jon Stewart even said, how come Ron Paul gets no press? And that was years ago, but there is truth to that.
Oh my gosh.
Daddy Paul would never steer you wrong. Daddy Paul always told the truth. and within the libertarian movement, there is a lot of love and respect for Ron Paul because he always told the truth. Whereas Rand is much more suspect because he is a much better politician. And he is a little bit like when he ran for president, you're like, is he with us? Is he against us? Like, where does he stand on things? I'm not going to vote for this nominee, and then he votes for him. And so, yeah, but Ron Paul, I think people are so hungry for any bit of authenticity that Ron Paul, Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, these people stand out because they don't seem like they're lying to you.
Right.
That is, oh my gosh, you guys, you and Chris and Frank are hitting on something that's so interesting to me. Stay with me while I make this point. As we are the only mammal, humans are the only mammal that suffer psychosis other than ones that are caused by environmental or behavioral stress or trauma. What I mean by that is everything that we do, we're driven by order, categories. Everything has a place, even as simple as boys and girls, left and right, front and back. Like we know where we stand in society and where our beliefs fall and have relevance and validity based on our order. So we hear that someone is an independent or a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian or an agnostic or a Christian or a Muslim. We immediately start to form what we think we know to be the platform of that person's belief system, which we probably have zero clue when first meeting someone what their life experience is, where they're from, what their travels have been, what their family is made up of, the trauma that they've dealt with. So it's enlightening. It is refreshing to hear that when you sat on the couch, Frank, you were kind of like, wait, I don't really like this guy. Like, you didn't allow yourself to immediately go with what you may or the little you knew about libertarianism to affect you being receptive to what it was he had to say. And I think because of the categories that we use as society, when, hate him or love him, when Donald Trump came along, everyone said, this is refreshing. He doesn't fall into any of those categories that we have created. And so I'm going to vote for him, or I'm going to back him, or I really like what he had to say. Bernie Sanders has done that his entire career. Ronald Reagan did that as the actor. Arnold Schwarzenegger did that as an actor. So I think that's refreshing.
One thing I'd throw in, I think we do all, absolutely there's categories, but I think people don't always know what categories they fall in. I've seen it so much.
Agreed.
Because I remember my father-in-law telling me he'd voted Democrat his entire life. That's all. He goes, I'm a Democrat, Frank. I'm a Democrat, Frank. I go, okay, that's fine, whatever. And then he took a quiz, an online quiz, and it told him that he was, after doing it was a CNN type of quiz. At the end, it said moderate Republican.
Wait, what?
And he was like, how can this be? I said, because you don't know what things stand for. And he could have been a blue dog Democrat. It might have been, those kind of go pretty close to each other. Again, you're trying to categorize something that doesn't necessarily need to be categorized. Right. But I just think it's for people not to say, well, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. Think about what people are. are saying and doing. And if you agree with that, yes, but don't just join a team. I think the team is is the toughest thing. I don't know if I talked about this last episode or what. If I have, just stop me. Our elections, the presidential elections, are now they're at least 2 years long, right? It's 2 years of waiting, and you join a team. You basically get so engulfed. Part of your life is so much about, I hope this person gets elected, that you begin to tie so much emotion to it that if they lose or they win, you're like, yeah or no. And then it's about beating the other team all the time. And that's what I think politics is now. It's supposed to be, well, one side win, the pendulum swung, right? The pendulum swung a little bit. It's going to swing back. You just have to have patience, which we don't have a lot of anymore.
Right.
But it's that patient swing that it's going to come back a little bit, one side or the other. If it starts to swing too far, and there might be a point where it doesn't, but I think we really do get so much emotional tie to these candidates that you don't even think for yourself anymore. You just go, that my guy said. When people say that with Donald Trump, they go this, and then you talk to them and you go, but what about this and this? They might go, well, that's not what we're talking about. Yeah, it is.
It is.
Right.
And
I think Frank, that this wall discussion that's going on right now is a prime example of that. Right, where it's not necessarily about, I think pretty much everybody that you can imagine agrees with border security, and border security would include some degree of wall, right? Not necessarily a full, coast to coast wall, but some degree of wall. And it's become, the wall has become a symbol of making sure that the other side loses. That's all that this is right now.
Yeah, I believe
we can't even have a rational conversation about what would border security include. But basically, at this point in time, it's nothing more than making sure the other side loses.
Yeah, so I have a theory on this, and I think that this is one of the goals that I have for my podcast, is to kind of rectify what I see as a key problem. We have made politics and all that entails in that, Americanism as a whole, into a religion, into a secular religion, to replace the pieces of identity that our great-grandparents or grandparents had. My great-grandparents they were German Americans in southern Indiana. People had a rich community, a face-to-face community, a small group of people were animals designed to live within small tribes of people. And I think we're being driven literally insane right now because we have so much hitting our brains, which are still evolutionarily the same as they were 10,000 years ago. And as you have seen the Lions Club, the Rotary Club, churches, all these little places, all these little pockets of identity, small neighborhoods, you look at the homogenization of American culture, you just see a lack of community. And so what has replaced that community, this sense of identity, this sense of community on the national stage? And so I'm a Republican. And so what comes with that is that ancient, I don't know the word, I'll pick a different one. That ancient idea that we must fight because you're attacking me. And I think if we can break out of that, start building up our local communities, engaging with each other on a communal level, engaging in our identity that isn't tied to this, stop being so insecure about our beliefs because we're replacing that insecurity with actual knowledge, then we start to see a much better society. Because, if your whole identity is I'm MAGA, 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 or I am a Barack Obama Democrat, or I'm a Bernie Sanders, and you weep if your candidate loses, like, you're a person that I think is emotionally unhealthy, and you need to find something beyond. Now, I know my whole identity is the libertarian guy for the most part, but I'm an uncle, and I have this group of friends and that group of friends. And so I can have these conversations. I don't need Al or Dave or Brian or Frank to agree with me, because I'm going to hang up and I'm going to go, I'm going to think about that more, or I hope they think about that more because I've done more research on it, So it is that lack of community and replacing it with this bigger identity that's really, I think, the root cause.
Well, in back with even what I was talking about there too, with my little theory deal. The other night when the Rams and the Saints played, there was a play near the end of the game that was pretty much blatant pass interference by the Rams. And all Saints fans felt completely ripped off and angry. They're emotionally invested in their team, right? And they see that play, and that's the only thing, and myself included, I because I know some people on that team, and I'm like, they're just completely ripped off. And that's awful. This game has been stolen from them. Now, Rams fans are going, yeah, but earlier in the game, there was a face mask that wasn't called by the Saints, and we would have scored. So whoever, you see things for your team, and you see everything is either going against your team. We learned about that in a media bias type of class, like the with confirmation bias and when you read a newspaper, a lot of times, this is a newspaper back when I was in school in 96, they talked, 94, 92, 93-ish, they talk about, you read it and you're immediately looking for what you don't believe or what you think they're coming from if you have some type of a belief that's different than what they're saying. But my point in this is, you watch that Rams-Saints game, lots of things could have gone either way and made big were moments that were very important and changed the game. But people look at certain things, and when it goes against your team, it's the end of the world. And I see that happen. That's why I look at this political thing as being teams and a sport. And it's almost like when your candidate loses, you've put all this time, you're wearing their jersey, you got their bobblehead, and now your person loses, and you're like, I hate this other person. Well, you have to live with that person for a while, and then in 4 years you get the chance to vote again, and that's just.
Hey man, I think spend $100 on bobbleheads.
I think Frank, what's even more destructive though is when you start to ascribe certain attributes to the other side, right? And I think going back to that video of the teenager smirking at the Native American elder, right? I have to admit, if he had not been wearing a MAGA hat, I probably would have given him a little bit more leeway. Right. And so it's, you see that instant snapshot and your mind. I mean, and this is what has helped us survive through thousands and thousands of years, is the ability to look at any situation and quickly, deduct what is a threat and what is not. But when you see that MAGA hat, you automatically, if you're on the left, will assume a certain reason
profile,
for that interaction, a certain profile, right? Right. It could be totally incorrect. As it was, in my opinion, in this case, I immediately jumped on the bandwagon that, this kid was 100% to blame, and let's figure out who he is and make sure he never gets into college. Right. But honestly,
hey,
that's sort of
this isn't helping me with you.
No, but I'm saying, but the good part of this story is I'm actually glad it turned out to be the opposite, right? That wasn't necessarily the case, that I am able to look back and say, wait a minute, I jumped to an assumption that I probably shouldn't have based on a red hat.
Right.
So let me ask you guys, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's you, Chris.
Okay, let me ask you guys a question. The emotions when your team loses in football are probably the same emotions I feel when my team loses literally every election cycle. Every single time.
Well, you shouldn't be siding with the refs.
All right. Trust me, I don't. But those emotions are the same. Those emotions are very real. But what is the difference between when your sports team loses and when your political team loses?
It's a good question.
I think when your political team loses, I mean, it's hard to think, but it does affect people's lives. I mean, if you think about what's going on with this administration in terms of stocking the Supreme Court, I mean, you could have your reproductive rights, however you choose to. We're not getting in that argument. You could have those affected in terms of them no longer being legal in your state. I believe there's only one abortion clinic in Mississippi. It could affect your taxes. It could affect your Medicaid. I know the CHIP program was taken out, and that had to do with there was just fund of money for kids that had needed surgeries but couldn't get them. I mean, when you elect a new administration, they could cut programs that could affect you. I mean, we're seeing how these tariffs affected the Midwest and how there's a domino effect with everything we do. So I do think that you know, that's the difference between that and your sports team. I think
Right.
you're
Right. So what is it? Let me follow up because I want to ask him a couple questions. So what is the underlying reason that it's so important that you win every single election cycle? Because of those very things.
right.
If you don't obey, then eventually someone with guns or the tax man comes because you didn't obey. And there are a bunch of people on the other side of the argument going, Barack Obama meant this for this and this for this, and the death panels and all this stuff. And so the reality is that we have chosen to use that violence, that force, to create a game where everybody, it's a binary game where everybody, if I don't win this, then the other side is going to force me to do what they want, and I refuse that. And so it's a very tribal game. And so instead of focusing on nonviolent solutions that don't involve forcing people to live the way that they don't want to live, we should be having conversations about how do we work together to build a world where you get what you want and you live the way that you want. Because I'm a pro-life person, but I'm under no illusion that no matter how illegal you prohibit abortion, it will always exist and it will still continue. And as a pro-life person, I'm just going to have to accept the fact that abortion will exist in any society that I live in. And so I would rather use persuasion instead of force to get other people to live in a way that I think is beneficial. And if they don't, that's their choice. And so I think that's why we're all so wigged out. And so the libertarian viewpoint is that the force is the problem, and it is the thing that divides us. And so instead of focusing on should you buy these razors or not, it's should you be forced to buy these razors or not, you know, in a very simple example.
So let me play devil's advocate with you real quick, Chris, if the little bit of time we have left. So on the other side of that coin, the force is being used in whatever manner of fashion. Do you think that, and you can completely answer me, you know, openly. Do you think that force is completely unnecessary, or do you think at times, in order to create the order I was making reference to earlier, that it is necessary? Not necessarily to completely impede upon somebody's belief system, but at the same time, someone may think it's okay to do 90 miles an hour near a school zone when there are a bunch of kids at the school. But the force is you are not allowed to do that for the safety of the kids. You're not allowed to go faster than 15 miles an hour in a school zone. So I guess I'm asking, as a devil advocate, what do you think?
I get what you're saying. Yes. The reality is that people will choose based on their own incentives whether or not they want to speed in a school zone. The people who have no regard for others will do what they do, and they will suffer the consequences. It doesn't matter how many laws you pass. By and large, most people will just do whatever they want to do unless they're persuaded of the right thing. When you try to force people to do things, they rebel. And so I can't answer that completely, because part of being a libertarian is the constant practice of being a libertarian. A new thing pops up and you have to work through it in your mind and try to understand, because it's such a different way of thinking than how we've ever been taught. And so how much force should there be in a society? There are a lot of compelling arguments from people like Murray Rothbard that there should be none. But I fully haven't worked that out. I don't know that I would buy into private courts and things like that. So I don't have an answer for you.
I just have a question. Do you think it's a little bit disingenuous to have that stance, for anybody to have your stance, when at the same time you are indirectly benefiting right now because of some form of regulation? Let's say you and I have a house next to each other. You have property value in that house. You maintain your home. And I like to have nudists over. And not only do I like to have that, we blow up 50-foot, giraffes, and we have a party. We don't keep the music too loud, but we just congregate in my front yard. That affects your property value. If I decide to paint my house pink with green polka dots next to your house, that affects your property value. So you do have housing commissions where you can say, hey, my next door neighbor is digging in his backyard. I don't know if there's a gas line back there. you do have some regulation, and I think you or in any human being would use that order that the government provides. Should your next door neighbor Al decide to walk around with no robe and your daughter's outside?
But I think well, go ahead. Sorry.
No.
So this is a common question. It's sort of mocked by libertarians and who will build the roads, right? We are on the downslope of government power. The American Revolution was an enormous step forward in liberty and freedom and saying you have personal responsibility. Individuals are free to choose. It started with John Locke. We're talking about 400 years of the idea of individuals being the ultimate source of power, and they have self-government. That's a brand new idea in human history. Before that, you had kings and you had tribal leaders and you had, the idea that you have that order, right? Instead of you are in charge of yourself. So in a lot of these situations, when arguments like that are presented, it's hard to imagine this different way of thinking because there haven't been a lot of people trying to work through the solutions in a private way in that specific example. There are a lot of people, a lot of libertarian theorists that I won't bore you with their names, who have kind of worked on that kind of stuff. People like Walter Block. I will bore you with one name.
I won't bore you with names like the following. Colon.
Very Rothbard. Bastiat. So there, but that is a very small amount of the human animal, the human brain, the mindset trying to work on these problems. And so, do I have an answer for how every single specific instance would work in a free society? No, I absolutely don't. But I don't think that it's necessarily.
Well, let's just use that example. We have properties that are next to each other.
Right.
Is it of your mind state that Al Jackson can do? I'm really curious.
Sure.
Is it of your mind state that I can do what I want to, as long as it's not impeding on you? So it's would it be like, as long as the music's not too loud, as long as like what like who determines like what's too much? Because maybe for you, me having a car in the driveway and not putting it in the garage is an eyesore. So, or leaving the lawnmower in the middle of the lawn, like maybe that's too much for you, or you might not care. So I'm curious, like how would that work just with these two neighbors, Chris and Al?
Everything depends. A libertarian society depends on empathy. It is the driving motivator. When you want to overcome someone else's individualistic instinct, I would walk over to you, Al, and say, listen, here's how you are affecting me in the following ways. I think most people, when presented with a polite conversation, would go, you know what, you're right, I'll tone it down, I'll do this. But at the end of the day, if they don't follow suit, then I have the freedom of movement so I can leave. Secondly, a lot of a free society would depend on contract. A lot of homeowners associations. So think of it in those terms. So there would be specific rules that people would voluntarily agree on. The problem that we have now is that I live in a city and we live under a government. This was Jefferson's argument, that he didn't believe that we should really have a constitution because it's up to every generation to decide the rules. The five of us should sit here and converse about what we think is acceptable behavior. It's not for some guys who own slaves.
Strip clubs every Thursday and Friday.
Right. And so when you're having those conversations about what kind of society, what kind of social norms you'd expect, you're going to eventually, through spontaneous order, shuffle into communities of like-minded people. Spontaneous order is illustrated by birds flying in the air. How do they know how to fly in a V? It just happens. So, how does
I don't Chris, the argument that it's prettier to see a group of different birds. And you see the birds flying in a V because they're all of like-minded, the same purpose. And I don't know if that would break up the tapestry of America if we just had a neighborhood of hippies, a neighborhood of skateboarders, a neighborhood of tech guys. And I think neighborhoods are cool when a lawyer lives next to a photographer and a judge lives next to a nanny. I think that creates some kind of interweaving for a neighborhood to become a community.
Al, don't we already have that? Like, I mean, wouldn't you look at inequality and like here in Indianapolis, like all the white people live in Carmel and West Clay, and I live on the South Side in the middle of all the Vietnamese and the Burmese. Like,
Well, there are places where it does and has happened, and again, just to your point, it happens because of economic reasons. But I guarantee you, a lot of those neighborhoods that people came from are colorful people. When you walk down the street and you hear 4 different kinds of music, I think that does something to the brain when you see different kinds of people. But again, you're right. I mean, there's always going to be an economic barrier that, hopefully will be minimized, but it'll never be surmounted.
You value, let me make this one quick point. You value diversity, Al, and you will find other people who value diversity. I value diversity. I think everybody in this podcast values diversity. You will never be able to force someone to value diversity if they just don't. And so it's like, why waste your time trying to force them to shuffle into certain places when they aren't going to fit there?
I will be honest. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna ask, in a libertarian society, what creates the stability and the structure, right? I think of things like the EU, right, as an example of a number of warring states that have been killing each other for hundreds and hundreds of years decide, even though they still don't like each other all that much, that we have to have this union, we have to have this economic interdependence for one reason, and that's to create the stability and the peace to allow us to prosper. And I think as an intellectual exercise, like I'm really attracted to libertarianism, especially on the social side of things, but it seems to be more of an intellectual exercise than an actual practical application, because if we all sort of did what we wanted to do, it would be extremely fragmented, wouldn't it?
We already do what we already want to do. Like we live in a free society. I host a podcast in Indianapolis where I rail against the government, and nobody knocks on my door and tells me that I can't. I had the tires taken off of my car, and these guys stole the tires off of a car next to a police car 3 months ago. The police didn't do anything about it. It really is up to me to protect my property. It's up to the property owner of the apartment complex I live in to help me protect. So the notion that the police don't even have a constitutional, there have been Supreme Court rulings that say the police do not have to respond to you if you call 911. So you have the illusion of control.
I definitely know that.
Yeah, you have the illusion of control to maintain obedience. And I think in the case of the EU specifically, the reason that you see far-right groups starting to rise up in places like Germany with I think it's ADF, the people who live in East Germany who were under communist control got a late start to capitalism. They got a 40-year late start. And so many of the poor in Berlin are still poor. And so Angela Merkel lets in all of these new immigrants. And all of a sudden, people are fighting for scarce resources because the nature of bureaucracy is to limit resources because government is an inefficient use of human capital. And so you bring in these people who don't share the same values as you, don't speak the same language as you, and all of a sudden now they're competing against you for resources, and you go, yeah, okay, that's it. Maybe the Nazis are a good plan, and it's probably unfair to call the AfD Nazis, but that's kind of the rap on them. These far right groups in Europe, Brexit. If you watch HBO, you watch the Brexit movie with Sherlock. There is a scene in there that is fantastic where this woman just starts screaming, you don't know how bad it is where I live. The reason that it is bad, if you look at some of these charts, there's a great economist named Mark Blythe, and he gave this talk. It's on YouTube, and he talks about how wages after World War II, after the Industrial Revolution, start to go up at the same rate that productivity goes up. Then when Bretton Woods happens and they start using the Fed to inflate money, inflation goes way up, productivity goes way up, wages stay completely stagnant. Well, that is because of an artificial interference in the monetary system. It created a lot of inequalities. It created a lot of poverty. And then the governments are fighting these sorts of inequalities. So it's like building a dam. The government, in a lot of ways, is a dam between you and me and our personal interests. The way that you order society is through you and I voluntarily cooperating with each other.
Right. But at the same time, I would say the past 60 years, Europe has known something that it hasn't known for 500 years previous, and that's peace.
Wouldn't you say there's more democracy in Europe than ever before? The more freedom?
True. That's true. That is true.
Kings based on their vanity and pride, used to send bodies. I mean, listen to Hardcore History's World War I and the atrocities of World War I, because kings and politicians were too embarrassed to say we're losing this war. And they drafted people to go die and to get thrown into this meat grinder for their own pride, the individual person who had the authority to force people to go into war. So we haven't given it a shot. We haven't. We are at an intellectual. You're right. I am talking about intellectual things, but the more you intellectualize it and start to realize that you have control over your life and no other man should, the more people that I can reach, the more people will become libertarian and it will become less theoretical.
Yeah.
Well,
all right, who wants to sign up?
guys,
Well, I will tell you this much: there's a man of senior age down here in South Florida who was recently on the news in the last couple of months for, shall we say, gardening and cutting his lawn in the buff.
Yes.
And this is a real news story. Yes, it actually was happening. And when he was reported to the authorities, they said, in all actuality, in this county of Florida, we cannot arrest the man for being on his own property as long as he does not cross a property line or walk out onto the sidewalk or the street.
I want to build a world where the greatest concern you have is naked man mowing it.
That is 111 years old in his
Chris,
in his lawn.
I know you're a cool dude, but you would have a problem with it.
Yo,
If it's your daughter's 4th birthday and you guys have a bouncy house out there, and here comes,
Saggy.
Yeah,
some folks were
Saggy
laughing.
and Scooby.
Other folks, they were like, "Wait a minute, man! I mean, come on!" And then some folks thought it funny. Other parents were quite upset. So I found that to be. He is definitely of the libertarian idea.
Listen, he's going to stop when his sack hits the blades.
It was pretty close. I mean, I'm just saying.
And we've devolved.
Yeah.
All right. Chris, do you want to plug your stuff?
Yeah, wearelibertarians.com. Please give us a listen. We post something every day, so there's a lot to chew on. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Spangle, Instagram, Facebook. Feel free to follow me. If you have questions, send me a note at editor@wearelibertarians.com.
And AlanFrank.com has everything for us. I'm going to enjoy some Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah,
Frank.
Yes,
I got accosted by friends. They're like 3 sets of friends came by our house today. I'll tell you what, I could have used a naked old guy in front.
I'm trying to get my opportunities.
So AlanFrank.com, all the information for this. Thank you, Chris, for being on with us. Dave, I hope you got a bunch of the questions in that you wanted to.
I did.
Excellent. And we'll see you next time. Very good, everybody.
All right, kids. Love y'all.